Good morning, welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Sunday, March the 8th, 2026, and this is the second in our series for the month of March. Were you there when they crucified the Lord? Last week we looked at the disciples. This week we're looking at the people of Jerusalem, and that's going to fall into a couple of categories. There are residents of Jerusalem who are there all the time. That is their home. And so they live in close proximity to the temple. A lot of them are people who are connected to the priesthood, the Levites and other folks like that. But there's also common, ordinary people who just live in the general vicinity of Jerusalem. And so going up for the holiday festivals is no big deal for them. They're practically home anyway. But there are people like the Romans who are there to keep law and order. So we're going to look at the people of Jerusalem. Today we're going to go 4 places in Scripture. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 18, which is Jesus riding into town on the donkey. Then we're going to look at Luke 21, the first 4 verses, about the widow who shows up at the temple and gives everything that she has to live on. And it's still practically nothing in terms of financial contributions. And it's contrasting her with the people who have plenty, and they exchange their money for smaller denominations of money so that they can make a bigger sound to attract attention to themselves. And then we're going to look at Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, who don't live in Jerusalem, but they live in Bethany, which is essentially right across the ravine and on the back side of the Mount of Olives. There are a lot of people there in the crowds. And then we're going to look at the crowd for the crucifixion. So we'll be in Luke 21, John chapter 11, and John chapter 19 by the time we finish the lesson today. But we're going to start in Matthew chapter 21 with the Triumphal Entry. 3 times a year, all the Jewish men, and man is considered to be about age 12 to 13, when a boy would be bar mitzvahed and considered to be an adult in the faith. If they are physically able, they are required to come to Jerusalem for Passover in the spring, for Pentecost, Shavuot, in late spring, early summer, and for tabernacles in the fall. Women are welcome to come. It's not like it's a guys only thing. Women are welcome to come, but the requirement isn't laid on them, because if a woman is alone in the world, if she's elderly, if she's a young mother taking care of very young kids, traveling the long distances might not be practical or even safe for her. And so the requirement isn't laid on them, but they are welcome to come. But the men are required to come. And we learn from the gospel accounts of Jesus' life that when Jesus was 12 years old, the age when a boy would be bar mitzvahed, he and his parents went to Jerusalem for Passover, as was their custom, which meant that they had made it a regular habit of going to Jerusalem for the festival, and Mary was there too. And that's where they leave after the festival is over with, and they're headed back about 90 miles north towards Nazareth, and they get a full day's walk away from the city of Jerusalem, and they discover when it's time to camp for the night with the group that they're traveling with that teenage Jesus is nowhere to be found. Well, parents of teenagers can relate to that story. They look everywhere. They had assumed that he was just with the group, but when they realize he's not here, Joseph and Mary go all the way back to Jerusalem. Just them. They don't have the whole group go back with them. Just them, they go back, and then they have to spend 3 days hunting him before they find him right there at the temple. So when we're talking about Jesus' triumphal entry, there's a large number of people for whom Jerusalem and its immediate vicinity, the little towns and villages that are close by, like in Karim, which is where John the Baptist's family had lived when he was born, or like Bethany on the Mount of Olives where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived. There are people who are close by, but there are also people who have put aside their daily affairs and made it a major point of their year to prepare to go down to Jerusalem to celebrate the festival and then to go back home and pick up with their daily lives. And so you've got lots and lots of people filling up Jerusalem. You have the religious leaders who are there. You have the Romans who are always there. They're garrisoned nearby for crowd control. And the priests know every year that they're going to select a male lamb, a year old, that they're going to parade into the city of Jerusalem, and they're going to bring that lamb from the Mount of Olives down through this steep valley across the Kidron Brook and into the city from the eastern gate. And they're going to leave that lamb tied up there at the temple complex so that anybody coming into Jerusalem for the festival can inspect that lamb for 4 days. Why? Because all the way back in Exodus, some 2,000 years earlier, God had told Moses, this is what you tell the people, back when they're slaves in Egypt. On the 10th day of the month of Nisan on their calendar, they were to select a male lamb without blemish. They were to bring it into their homes instead of leaving it out there in the pens where other animals might be. They were to inspect it for 4 days to make sure that it was a lamb without blemish. Well, anybody who's ever had pets in the house, you know what happens when you bring an animal into the house. The kids are going to be playing with it. They're going to regard it as a pet. They're going to name it. Maybe they'll argue about whose bed it's going to sleep in. They're going to get to love that little creature for 4 days. And then Dad's got to go take it out and kill it. Because they needed to understand how serious sin was. So the priests are expecting to do the national lamb and bring it into town and put it up there on the Temple Mount where everybody can inspect that lamb on 10 Nisan on their calendar. And on the 4th day, 14th of the month, at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a priest would be taking the national Passover lamb and slaying it and putting it on the altar to cover the sins of the people for the year. Meanwhile, every household is going to have their own lamb that they have either brought with them or they have purchased while they were there at the temple to have their own family Passover celebration. And so the crowds are there, gathered on the east side of the city. Nobody got confused and went to the north gate or the south gate or the west gate. Today happens to be the beginning of daylight savings time this year. And so a lot of people were putting it out on social media, and news broadcasters were including a little mention of it, and you'd see a little quick slide up on your TV screens reminding people this Sunday is daylight savings time, spring forward, and then of course in the fall they'll do the fall back. So there was no excuse for somebody who failed to set their clock forward. And there may be somebody. We're at church today. Everybody at our church apparently got the memo because we're all here. But it's possible that there might be some visitor that starts to show up at our church doors just as we're about to exit after our worship service today because maybe they forgot to set their clocks ahead. But there was no such thing in Jerusalem as people forgetting to know which gate to be at. So they're all clustered up on the east side. And they're expecting to do the same thing that they do for Passover every year. Just like you may have some traditions in your house where your family celebrates Christmas or Thanksgiving or some other major holiday the same way every year. And you're not expecting this year to be any different than last year or the year before or the year before that. But it is. Because this year, when the priests come in with a national lamb, Jesus is going to be coming into town right behind that part of the procession, riding on a donkey, and a lot of the people of Jerusalem, standing there ready to cheer for the national lamb and not expecting really to see anybody else in the parade, suddenly see Jesus, and a lot of them connect the biblical dots between what Zechariah, in Zechariah chapter 9 had said about this is how you'll recognize your Messiah, meek and lowly, riding on a donkey, to the Daniel chapter 9 dot, where they were told how much time would be from when the decree was issued to rebuild Jerusalem after Nebuchadnezzar's people had knocked it down, until the Messiah would be cut off and have nothing. So when they see Jesus riding right behind the priest parading the national Passover lamb, a lot of the people get it. And they start praising Jesus, waving their palm branches, throwing their coats down so that the donkey can just ride right over it as a way of preparing a carpet of welcome for the King of the Jews. They get it, sort of. The priests don't like it. They hear it, they understand what the people are doing, and they don't like it one little bit. So the priests are going to not try to shush the crowds themselves, because they're actually afraid of the crowds. They're going to approach Jesus and tell this rabble, these nobodies, these nothings, be quiet. These are their priests. They're the people who are supposed to be caring for their spiritual needs, representing them before God when they bring their sacrifices. They're supposed to be caring for the people. And basically they've just dissed them by saying that they're rabble, that they're nobodies, that they're nothing. They've gotten full of themselves. So let's look at the account in Matthew chapter 21. And I chose Matthew for this one. All four Gospels record this event. But let's think about Matthew for just half a second. Matthew is one of Jesus' 12 disciples. He's been with Jesus for the last 3 years, just like John has. Mark and Luke were not two of the 12 disciples. They haven't experienced everything, but both Matthew and John have experienced everything. But Matthew's prior job to becoming a disciple was to be the tax collector. And what's going to happen at the temple? People are going to have to pay their temple tax. They're going to have their lambs, if they brought one from home nearby in Jerusalem, in the suburbs around Jerusalem. And chances are really high that the priests and the Levites are going to find some little blemish with their lambs. Oh, can't use that one. And what are they going to have to do? Shell out some more money to buy a lamb. Oh, but we'll take your lamb off of your hands if you don't want to have to deal with it anymore. And that lamb's going to get recycled and sold to the next person. They were robbing the people, the priest. And Matthew, who had become a disciple of Jesus, was at first hearing all of the criticism that the scribes and the teachers of the law and the religious leaders, who were scoundrels themselves, they heard Jesus be criticized for selecting Matthew as a disciple and for going to the house of Matthew and his friends to have meals. What's he doing hanging out with these sinners? So Matthew has a lot of reason to welcome Jesus coming into town. Matthew chapter 21, starting in verse 1. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives. That's one of those suburb towns. Bethphage is on the top of the Mount of Olives. Bethany is a little ways down the backside of the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, tell him that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken of through the prophet. And there they're going to quote Zechariah 9:9. "Say to the daughter of Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." the disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt, placed their cloaks on them, and Jesus sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches down from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." The crowds have seen him. They've connected those two biblical dots. And they're saying the exact words of praise for Jesus riding on the donkey, as they have just said, cheering the lamb that preceded them into town, that national, every year Passover lamb. One of the things that's brought out in this story is that this is a young donkey that's never been ridden before. Certain animals that are ridden have to be broken first. Because what will happen the first time somebody tries to put a saddle on them and climb on their backs? They start to buck and kick. What is this? I don't want this weight on me. And they're trying to throw it off. There's no evidence in any of the four Gospels that record the account of Jesus riding into town that this donkey reacted in any way trying to kick him off. The donkey is calm. Mama's nearby because Matthew records that they take both the mother and the colt and that Jesus is riding on the colt. Mama's nearby, but the donkey is in the presence of Jesus. Sometimes it gets pointed out, particularly around this time of year, as people are putting together Easter-type programs and children's ministry, or they're going out and they're purchasing little toy lambs or donkeys to give as gifts and part of an Easter basket, is that the donkey, unique among animals, the way its hair is done, has a sign of the cross on its back. So just the way the fur goes. God designs his creation. God knows every creation's purpose. The donkey is calm in the middle of this huge crowd. It's one thing to be out and away from your familiar place, whether it's your pen, if you're an animal, your home, or whether you're out and about in a strange new place. It can be frightening. It can be scary. May not know what to do. This donkey is calm in the presence of Jesus with a huge crowd. It's being ridden, something that's never happened to it before. It's carrying the weight of Jesus. And people are yelling and screaming and cheering and waving things. And the donkey has to remain calm in a strange situation, in something that they've never done before. We can learn a few life lessons from a donkey. That when we're afraid, when trouble comes, or even if we're just in an uncertain situation and we don't know what to do, we can trust the one that we're with because God's Holy Spirit dwells inside of us. Matthew is going to record not only this triumphal entry, but going into the temple court areas and seeing the money changers' tables where they're cheating the people. And Jesus is going to kick over tables and fix the problem because the real king is in charge here. But the religious leaders don't like that, and they're going to hate him even more. They've already decided they want him dead. They're looking for an opportunity. By Wednesday, opportunity will present itself when Judas comes to them. But they're looking for an opportunity to kill him already. And him coming into town and being cheered by the people and accepting that. There are some groups that try to say that Jesus never claimed to be God. That there's a whole seminar that meets every year called the Jesus Seminar, where they look at the Bible and they try to say, well, we think these things actually happened, but the rest of this is just myths or stories that the church made up to try to make Jesus out to be the Messiah. After the fact, we don't think these things really happened. And one of the things that they'll deny is that Jesus ever claimed to be God in the flesh. He's just accepted worship. When the people are saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest," they are worshiping him as the Messiah. And when those religious leaders asked Jesus, "Tell this crowd to be quiet, tell this rabble to be quiet," he says, "No, this is why I came. If they were quiet, the very stones would cry out." Well, it's 2,000 years past the time of Jesus riding into town on that donkey. And there's a lot of people who are trying to deny that Jews ever lived in the land. There are some people, including people who claim to be Christians, who actively attend certain churches, and they swear up and down that, this is the alleged site of the temple. Somebody who claims to be a Christian and has many, many followers on social media, denying the reality of what happened. And the stones have been crying out. Hardly a week or a month goes by without there being some new archaeological discovery that backs up the Bible all over the Holy Land. Not just in Jerusalem, but all over the Holy Land. The naysayers are still out there. But Jesus was correct. This is why I came. No, they're worshiping me as the Messiah that I am. And so he refuses their request to tell the people to be quiet. He knows why he's there. Now we're going to look at Luke 21 very briefly, because now he's into the city, and for the next 4 days, he's going to be in Jerusalem every day. He's going to come into the city, into the temple complex every day. And various groups are going to be asking him questions. You're going to see the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians and lots of different groups of people asking Jesus questions, trying to see if they can find something to accuse him of, seeing if they can trip him up into saying or doing something that they can accuse him of. They are inspecting the Lamb. And he'll be there all day, every day, answering questions, and then he'll leave the city and go out at night back to the Mount of Olives, sometimes to the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where he's going to be on Thursday night. He may be going to Lazarus and Mary and Martha's home some other nights. It's just up and part way down the next hill. But he's there every day, answering questions, giving godly answers, turning their traps back on themselves, and seeing people for who they really are and what they really are. So he's doing this every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And Luke records, because Luke's gospel spends a lot of time focusing on the stories that involve the women, the sick, the elderly, the ones that society would look down on or think of as second class or not that important, the stories about children. Luke is going to record this part of the story. As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. "I tell you the truth," he said, "this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." That treasury was put in the outermost parts where the court of the women begins. Why? Because the priesthood system, they wanted to be able to collect money from everybody. Women could not go into the court of the men, and even Jewish men who weren't from the priestly line could not go into the court of the priest, and nobody except one priest per day could go into the actual temple itself. Today happens to be a rainy day. When we all came to church here at Cool Springs, the good news was that if it was raining hard enough to where we didn't want to park in the parking lot until we had unloaded passengers, we could pull up under a covered porch, let the passengers out, and whoever's driving the car has got to go park the car and then come in from the rain. But hey, we've got umbrellas, or maybe we've got a hoodie on the jacket or something we can use to cover our heads and quickly run to the porch, and then we can shake out the umbrella and come into the building. And we're doing church inside the building right now. We're having our Sunday school classes up and down the hallways here. And when we finish and we go into the sanctuary, we're all going to be allowed into the building. But when they went to the temple, if you weren't a priest, you were never, ever, ever going to go inside the building. You were going to be outside. And you were going to be outside in various segregated areas. There was a place on the temple courts for the Gentiles to come, but there was a big sign letting them know, Gentile, male or female, if you go beyond this stone, you will be put to death. And right next to that was the court of the women. They wanted to be able to collect the money from everybody, so the treasury's right there. And the wealthy are making a big show of pouring in money because it makes a big, big sound clanking down in there, and they wanted to draw attention. Hey, look at me and all I'm doing for God. But this woman shows up, and she's got virtually nothing. The two coins together were the monetary equivalent of half of a penny. Here in recent months, our government just announced that they're no longer going to manufacture the penny. Why? Because it's a 1 cent piece. And it costs 4 cents to produce a penny. Penny's still valid. You can still use it. But they're not going to make any new ones, and when they all eventually wear out and get to be no longer useful, they're just not going to make more pennies. All she had to live on, everything the woman owned, amounted to half of a penny in value. But where is she? God's house. What's she giving? What little she has. Most of the people standing there making sure that the collection box gets filled up probably looked with disdain or contempt at this poor widow woman. Because she's giving, but it's nothing. It's insignificant. She's a nobody. When I first lost my husband, I discovered something about myself that I hadn't known until that moment. All of a sudden, I had a real bit of, I don't like the term widow, particularly applying to me. Why? Because the way society looks at widows, poor, defenseless, unable to stand up for themselves, and that does not describe me. Even in my senior citizen, having some issues with knees and things like that, the body may be weakening, but not defenseless. But yet society, particularly in that day and time, a woman who didn't have a man to take care of her, whether it's a husband, a father, a son, a brother, whoever she has in her life, was a woman who had Target written all over her back. They couldn't go out and get jobs. The one thing a woman could do to make money was to sell herself. And if you're past a certain age, There isn't exactly a market price for that. Even if you don't have a moral compunction against it. Where is she? She's in the house of God. She's celebrating that festival. She's there for Passover. You know, she could be excused. The men are required to be there. But she's not required to be there. She could have kept the 2 mites, the half a penny, for herself and stayed home. And nobody would have thought anything about it. But by coming to the temple, by putting in all that she had, she's going to go home empty-handed, but with a full heart, because she's given herself to God. She's trusting in God no matter what. And she wasn't the only one. There were all kinds of people in Jerusalem who didn't have much. But they still showed up. They still worshiped God. They still did what they could. Even with a priestly system that looked down on them, that considered them to be second class at best or to be nobodies. A priesthood system that was robbing them blind and being proud of their position, had their own members-only entrance to where they didn't have to go in and out like the ordinary riffraff of society. And it's not just a first century issue. Sometimes sitting in our 21st century churches, people will come in. And maybe they're in desperate need, or maybe they're broken, or maybe they have just run out of other options and they're finally turning to God. Oh, but they don't smell so pretty. And maybe they don't have the right kind of clothes. Or worse, maybe they don't look like everybody else. And instead of feeling welcomed in the house of God, they receive the stares. Maybe sometimes it's a stare of pity. Oh, you poor pitiful thing. Or maybe it's a, what are you doing in here? Or maybe it's a case of, you need to dress better than that to come into this place. But they showed up. The widow showed up. Now we want to look at John chapter 11 and John chapter 19. The Gospel of John, written well after Matthew, Mark, and Luke are written. Matthew and Luke likely in the very early 60s. Mark probably in the 50s. John's going to write the Gospel of John in the mid-80s. His gospel's way, way different. He doesn't need to tell the same stories that Matthew, Mark, and Luke have already covered. Half of John's book, it's 21 chapters, half of the book, from chapter 11 through 21, deals with Jesus' Passion Week, from that triumphal entry all the way through his crucifixion and his burial and his resurrection and his post-resurrection experiences. John chapter 11 opens up with the death of Lazarus and Jesus coming after Lazarus has been gone for 4 days to raise him from the dead. And that's part of what we want to feature here. Starting in verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. Why? Because he's the male protector of the family. We don't know what age Mary and Martha are, but they're single women, and they're no better off in society than that poor widow woman that we just looked at in Luke, because their brother has died. and he was the male protector. Now what do we do? So a lot of these Jews from around Jerusalem, including a lot of the religious leaders, have come to Mary and Martha's home to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Mary's staying there with the crowd of people who are coming to offer comfort. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. She's got faith in the long-term future. She's not thinking about the near-term future, that Jesus is here and he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. She's just said, if he'd been here, he wouldn't have died. But people needed to see Jesus' power over death. They needed to see a resurrection up close and personal. He's raised Jairus' daughter up in Galilee sometime before. He raised the widow's son up in Nain, again, up in the Galilee. But the people around Jerusalem who've maybe heard from the folks who come down from Galilee to Jerusalem 3 times a year about Jesus doing these kinds of things, they haven't seen it with their own eyes yet. Martha's trusting for the long-term future, but at the same time, she's not seeing the immediate future. Now what are she and Mary supposed to do? Lord, if he'd been here, he wouldn't have died, but he's died. I know he's going to be raised at the last day. The last day is not terribly comforting to somebody who's grieving the immediate loss of somebody in their family, somebody that they care about, somebody who's taking care of them. And it doesn't help you figure out what to do tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. That sometimes we get, as Christians, into long-range thinking and we miss what's literally right under our noses sometimes. Martha is missing what's right under her nose, but she isn't going to miss it for long because Jesus is about to heal Lazarus. She's just told Jesus, I know he'll rise again at the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe you're the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And after she said this, she went back. She leaves Jesus standing right there in the street, goes back to the house, and calls her sister Mary aside. The teacher's here, she said, and is asking for you. That wasn't previously recorded. He's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had left him. He could have kept coming. When Martha ran off to go get Mary, he could have looked at the guys and gals who were following him, because there was a crowd of believers following him. Come on, guys, let's go. Let's go. But he just waited right there. And sure enough, here comes Mary now. He was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When it says the Jews there, it's not talking about ordinary people. It's talking about some of those religious leaders. Every time you hear in the gospel accounts, the Jews as a title, it's talking about some of the elites, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the elders of the people. It's not talking about an ordinary shopkeeper or a farmer. It's talking about somebody who's an official. They see Mary suddenly leave the house. And they correctly assume, okay, well, she's just lost a family member. He's been buried. She's probably leaving the house to go and weep by the graveside. A very logical thing to assume. So they follow her. Because they've got a divine appointment. It wasn't just Martha who heard Jesus say, I am the resurrection and the life. It was everybody who came with Jesus. And now it's about to be everybody who's following Mary out there to the roadside. They're going to hear what Jesus says to Mary. Jesus is going to be led to that tomb. He's going to tell them to roll the stone away, and somebody's got to roll the stone. And he's going to say, Lazarus, come forth. And all those religious leaders who were there to comfort Mary and Martha, because after all, they did have some money. Remember, just a few days before, Jesus has been at their home. And Mary's poured that expensive perfume. And even Jesus' disciples, some of them, were criticizing her. Why wasn't this money given to the poor? Why'd you waste that money? Well, it wasn't their money. It wasn't their perfume. It was Mary's perfume. But you see, because she was a woman, they thought they could tell her what to do. What she could do with her own money. She's got some money. They've got some wealth. So the religious leaders are there. And they're going to see Lazarus raised from the dead. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. Martha didn't fall at his feet. She went to him. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. You could think of that as a criticism. What took you so long? If you'd managed to get here in time, he wouldn't have died. Mary's just going to go fall at his feet. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. It's the same words that her sister said. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? You see, there's a whole lot of people who are questioning, why did Lazarus have to die? So that God's glory could be manifest. That crowd of religious leaders, some of them are seriously mourning and weeping along with Mary and Martha in the loss of Lazarus. But some of them still have such hard hearts that instead of seeing Jesus crying, and you got to ask the question, what's he crying for? He knows Lazarus isn't going to stay dead. He said that a couple of days ago when he delayed hurrying to Lazarus' bedside, and he had to tell his disciples, Lazarus is asleep. We're going to go wake him up. He knew Lazarus was about to be brought back to life. Why is Jesus weeping at that moment? He's not weeping for the death of Lazarus. That is temporary, and he's going to fix it in a matter of moments. And he knows he's going to fix it. He's weeping for the pain and the suffering of Mary and Martha. He's weeping for the people, the crowds, the people of Jerusalem and the surrounding communities, some of whom believe him, but their faith isn't perfect yet, like Mary and Martha, like Peter and Andrew and James and John and all the rest of the disciples, like the crowds who've experienced his miracles or witnessed them, They recognize him as a prophet and a healer, but they haven't quite realized yet that he's the God who's going to pay the sin penalty, that he's the Lamb of God who's going to take away the sins of the whole world. And he's also weeping for those religious leaders who, in spite of all evidence, just will not, under any set of circumstances, acknowledge him as the Messiah. Because it says there, but some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? They're trying to explain away the miracle of Jesus healing the blind man. They saw that. They didn't like it, but they saw it. And now they're trying to just, oh well, there's got to be some other explanation. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone and laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. Martha being practical. Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. By now, he's starting to decompose. He's starting to stink. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this, why? For the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. I love the way John puts that. He doesn't say the formerly dead man. He said the dead man came out. His hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let them go. Let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews, those are religious leaders, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, put their faith in him. Some of them finally came to recognize who Jesus is. Whether Nicodemus, remember him from John chapter 3, who the religious leader, the member of the Sanhedrin who comes at the night to ask Jesus questions, and he's sincere when he's asking the questions. And Jesus tells him that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. It's not recorded for us in Scripture when Nicodemus finally put his faith and trust in Jesus. But in between John chapter 3 and Jesus going to the cross, as he's about to in a few days, Nicodemus has come to faith. Because what's going to happen at the crucifixion? 2 people that are members of the Sanhedrin don't get invited to the nighttime trial. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. And that's what takes us to John chapter 19, just a few pages over. John chapter 19. There's going to be a crowd there at the crucifixion. That crowd's going to include people who mourned him, people like Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, James and John's mama, Aunt Salome. There are going to be the Roman soldiers who were there. There are going to be a lot of people who are in town for the feast of Passover, who are seeing this crucifixion because it's happening on the main road going in and out of town. The Romans did that on purpose. They wanted people to see this is what happens to people who fall under Rome's ire. Watch yourself, or you may wind up on a cross too. It was a very good visual warning. Obey or else. The religious leaders have sent some representatives there mocking Jesus. They're watching him die on the cross. Some of those religious leaders are going to say, he saved others, let him save himself. If you're really the Messiah, come down off that cross and then we'll believe. And the good news is Jesus didn't do what they wanted him to do. Because you see, he could have come off the cross. And had he come off the cross, before he paid the sin penalty, before he was the Lamb of God slain to cover the sins of the people. Then their belief in him at that point wouldn't have done him any good, because he wouldn't have completed the task of paying for the sins. Why do they have to have a lamb every year? Going all the way back to the original Passover, so that the death angel would pass over anybody who is covered by the blood. If he comes off the cross, then they're not covered by the blood because he hasn't died. It is love that keeps him on that cross. He stays on the cross. He dies. Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate and asks for permission to get the body down. Pilate doesn't believe Jesus is dead yet, because it normally takes days for people to die from crucifixion, not a mere matter of hours. Pilate actually sends for the centurion to come and confirm, yes, sir, he's really dead. You see, there are people who deny that too, who claim that, oh, he just fainted on the cross and was revived in the cool tomb. The Roman centurion's job was to execute Rome's prisoners. He comes and he tells Pilate, yes, sir, he's dead. Pilate gives Joseph permission to go get the body. Joseph goes to get the body. The soldiers are going to let him have him because Pilate has said so. Not only is Joseph there, not only is John, the beloved disciple, the one who's writing this gospel, there as an eyewitness, but who else shows up? Nicodemus. And what's he carrying? Spices for burial. They know he's dead. They've become believers. Some people become believers way, way late. Some of the people in Jerusalem that day became believers at the cross. Some people became believers the week before, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Some people were unknown to the world. We don't even get names for them. They're just referred to as the poor widow or a certain beggar. Jesus knew who they were. He was willing to die for them. Were you there when they crucified the Lord? Yeah, you were there. Because he had you on his mind. Because you can see yourself in some of those religious leaders who tend to look down on people who aren't just like them, or who favor folks who seem to have a lot to offer to the church in the way of money or skills or things, as opposed to somebody who is a drain on our resources. I actually one time was serving on a church staff as the education minister, and we were having a staff meeting, and the pastor and the associate pastor, who was also serving as the youth director at that point, and me as the education minister, were sitting in the pastor's office, and the pastor was sharing some of the plans he had for the church, where he wanted the church to change its name because he wanted to reach a broader community. The church was named after the town we were in, and he said, too many people living in this town are sort of on the lower end of economic society. We want to go out and try to reach people who can pay their own way. And that associate pastor and I looked at each other, didn't say anything, we just looked at each other because we couldn't believe what we just heard from the pastor's mouth. But when the staff meeting was over with, we huddled together in another part of the church, and we talked about the fact that we've got to let this be known. The lay leadership needs to know that he's not what he appears to be. He doesn't really care about all kinds of people. And neither one of us stayed very much longer at that church. There are people who need Jesus. Some people will be so hard of heart, like the people who saw Lazarus raised from the dead and still wanted to put Jesus to death, who stood there at the foot of the cross making fun of a dying man while he's actively dying. But there are people whose hearts were tender enough to realize, I need Jesus. I need to be right with God. Which one are you? Hopefully you see yourself at the foot of the cross as someone who worships the God who came to pay your sin penalty. Thanks for watching.